Hey guys, tonight we begin not with Shakespeare's Venice or a courtroom drama, but with something far more familiar and unsettling: the cost of helping someone you love. Because believe it or not, in 1950 San Francisco, a time of fog-wrapped piers, jazz clubs, and the American dream, generosity could still destroy you just as easily as it could in Renaissance Italy. From pawn shops on Kearny Street to vineyard estates in Napa Valley, this story is less about merchant ships and more about the bridges we build across our deepest divides, and what it costs to cross them. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fog rolled thick over San Francisco Bay in the autumn of 1954, wrapping itself around the piers, where cargo ships rocked gently against their moorings. Along the Embarcadero, where longshoremen in flat caps and canvas jackets hauled crates stamped with Italian words, olio d'oliva, vino, formaggio, the waterfront hummed with the commerce of two worlds meeting. This was the domain of Antonio Rossini, a man whose name was spoken with respect in every Italian social club from North Beach to the Mission District. Antonio stood that particular October morning on Pier 33, a tall figure in a charcoal gray suit and fedora, watching as wooden crates were lowered from the hold of the Santa Lucia, fresh from Genoa. He was 42 years old, with dark hair silvering at the temples and eyes that carried both warmth and a peculiar melancholy. His importing business, Rossini and Sons, though he had no sons, only the memory of a brother lost in the war-brought olive oil, wine, cheeses, and fabrics from the old country to the grocers and restaurants of California. He was prosperous, generous to a fault, and known throughout the Italian community as a man who would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. But on this morning, as the gulls cried overhead and the salt wind whipped across the water, Antonio felt that strange heaviness in his chest that had plagued him lately, a sadness without name or reason, as if some part of him remained forever at sea, never quite reaching harbor. "Antonio, there you are." The voice cut through his reverie. Turning, Antonio saw his cousin Bassanio hurrying along the pier, weaving between stevedores and cargo nets. Bassanio Ferrara was 28, handsome in that careless way some young men possess. With wavy dark hair he wore slicked back with pomade and a smile that could charm the birds from the trees. He wore a tan jacket over an open-collared shirt, his appearance just slightly too casual, just slightly too worn, the telltale signs of a man living beyond his means. "Bassanio," Antonio said, his face brightening despite his melancholy. He embraced his cousin warmly, kissing both cheeks in the old way. "What brings you down to the waterfront so early? I thought you'd still be sleeping off last night's party at Vesuvio's." Bassanio laughed, but there was something nervous in it, something ashamed. "Actually, cousin, I need to talk to you. Somewhere private, maybe?" They walked away from the noise of the dock, past warehouses with peeling paint and faded advertisements for Ghirardelli chocolate and Del Monte fruits, until they reached a small cafe on Battery Street. Inside, the air smelled of espresso and fresh cornetti. They sat at a corner table, and a stout woman in an apron brought them tiny cups of coffee, so strong it could wake the dead. Bassanio stirred sugar into his espresso, not meeting Antonio's eyes. "I've been a fool, Antonio. A damned fool." "Tell me something I don't know," Antonio said gently, though his eyes were kind. "I owe money, a lot of money, to everyone: tailors, restaurants, the poker games in Chinatown. I've been living like I was still in the army with nothing to worry about except the next patrol." He finally looked up. "You've helped me before. Too many times. You've paid my debts, co-signed my loans, and what have I done? Spent it all again, like water running through my fingers." Antonio reached across the table and gripped his cousin's shoulder. "Your family, Bassanio. My blood, whatever you need. No, wait. Listen to me first." Bassanio leaned forward, and now his eyes held something else. Not just shame, but hope. "I think I've found a way out. A real way, not another scheme. Do you remember Portia Belmont?" Antonio's brow furrowed. "Belmont, the wine family, up in Napa?" "That's right. Her father, Lorenzo Belmont, owned half the vineyards in the valley. He died last year heart attacking Portia, inherited everything. The land, the wineries, the mansion in Belmont. That's how the family got their name, from the town. Antonio, I met her 2 years ago, before I went broke, at a charity gala at the Fairmont. We talked all night. She was beautiful, educated. She studied literature at Stanford, and she laughed at my jokes. I know she liked me. And now you want to court her," Antonio said, understanding dawning. "More than that, I want to marry her. Not for the money, Antonio, though God knows it wouldn't hurt, but because I can't stop thinking about her. She's got this way about her, intelligent and kind, with these eyes that see right through the nonsense to who you really are." He paused. "But I can't go to her like this, broke and desperate, wearing suits I bought 3 years ago, and driving a rusted-out Chevrolet. Her father's will was strange. Everyone's talking about it. She has suitors coming from all over, wealthy men, sophisticated men. I need to present myself properly. I need a car that doesn't backfire, new clothes, enough money to take her to decent places and show her I'm not just some North Beach dreamer." Antonio sat back, processing this. Through the cafe window, he could see the morning sun beginning to burn through the fog, turning the city's hills into layered silhouettes. "How much would you need?" $3,000, Bassanio said quietly. "I know it's a lot." 3,000, Antonio repeated. It was indeed a substantial sum in 1954, enough to buy a new Cadillac or put a down payment on a house. "Bassanio, you know I'd give it to you in a heartbeat. But right now, every dollar I have is tied up in those ships." He gestured toward the waterfront. "I've got 3 vessels at sea. The Santa Lucia just came in, but the Madonna del Mar is rounding Cape Horn with a cargo of wine, and the San Giuseppe is crossing from Marseille with fabric and marble. Until they arrive and I sell the goods, my capital is locked up." Bassanio's face fell, but Antonio quickly continued. "However, my credit is good. Very good. I can borrow against the incoming shipments. We'll find someone who'll loan us the money on my signature alone. You'll have your $3,000, cousin. You'll go to this Portia Belmont, and you'll win her heart properly. Antonio, I can't ask you to borrow money for my—" "You're not asking. I'm offering. What good is prosperity if I can't help the people I love?" Antonio stood, draining his espresso. "Come, I know where we can get this money. There's a man on Kearny Street near Portsmouth Square, a pawnbroker and moneylender. His name is Shylock. Kearny Street in the autumn sun was a canyon of old brick buildings and narrow alleys, where Chinese grocers displayed bok choy and winter melon beside Jewish delicatessens advertising pastrami on rye. This was the edge of Chinatown, where cultures collided and mixed like the waters of the bay meeting the Pacific. Above the street, laundry lines stretched between fire escapes, and hand-painted signs in English, Chinese, and Yiddish advertised services of every kind. Shylock's pawn shop occupied the ground floor of a 3-story building that had survived the great earthquake of 19-6. The window display showed a collection of surrendered dreams: wedding rings, pocket watches, a violin, a set of silver candlesticks, a Purple Heart medal from the war. Above the door, a sign in faded gold letters read, SLEVY Loans, Jewelry, Valuables. Shylock Levy was a man of 60 years, though the life he'd lived had carved those years deeply into his face. He was shorter than average, with gray hair receding from a high forehead, sharp brown eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and hands that moved with careful precision. He wore a dark vest over a white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a yarmulke pinned to his thinning hair. In his shop, surrounded by the pawned possessions of desperate people, he conducted his business with meticulous attention to detail. He had come to America in 1938, one of the lucky few who'd escaped Vienna before the darkness swallowed everything. His wife and daughter, Rebecca and Leah, had made it out with him. His parents, his brothers, countless cousins, they had not. He never spoke of what happened to them, but sometimes at night, in the apartment above the shop, his wife would hear him crying in his sleep, names tumbling from his lips in German. In San Francisco, Shylock had rebuilt from nothing. The pawnshop, the loans, the careful accumulation of capital, these were his fortress against a world that had taught him the only security was what you could hold in your own hands. He was excluded from the bank's executive offices, barred from the gentlemen's clubs on Nob Hill, unwelcome at the yacht club in Sausalito. The Italian merchants like Antonio borrowed from the big banks at favorable rates. Men like Shylock charged higher interest because their money came from their own pockets, earned dollar by dollar, saved with painful discipline. And Antonio Rossini Antonio had a particular talent for making Shylock feel small. 3 months earlier, on these very streets, Antonio had encountered Shylock outside the Bank of America on Montgomery Street. Shylock had been denied a business loan again, and as he descended the marble steps, he'd heard Antonio's voice. Shylock, they wouldn't loan money to you either? Well, perhaps if you didn't charge such criminal interest rates to desperate people, the banks might trust you more. Antonio had said it loudly, with other merchants listening, and though his tone was light, almost joking, the words had cut. Antonio, who borrowed at 3% from institutions, felt entitled to judge Shylock, who loaned at 10% from his own pocket. Now, as the bell above the shop door jangled, Shylock looked up from his ledger to see Antonio Rossini himself entering, accompanied by a younger man Shylock didn't recognize. Mr. Rossini, Shylock said, his voice carefully neutral. He removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a handkerchief. This is unexpected. What brings you to my humble establishment? Did you finally decide the bank interest rates weren't low enough? Antonio stepped forward, removing his fedora. The shop was cramped, every surface covered with items awaiting redemption or sale. A radio played softly in the back, Doris Day singing Secret Love. Shylock, I need to borrow money. $3,000. Shylock's eyebrows rose. He replaced his spectacles slowly. 3,000. That is substantial. And the banks won't help you? My capital is at sea. The banks would take weeks to process a loan against my incoming cargo. I need the money quickly. Antonio's voice was steady, but there was something in having to ask that clearly bothered him. I see. So when Antonio Rossini needs money quickly, suddenly the usurer on Kearny Street is good enough. Shylock came around the counter, his hands clasped behind his back. Tell me, Mr. Rossini, do you remember what you said to me outside the Bank of America about my criminal interest rates? Shylock, or perhaps you recall the time at the Fisherman's Wharf auction when you told everyone within earshot that Jews like me were bleeding the community dry? Or last Christmas when I offered to loan money to the Benedetti family for their daughter's surgery, and you advised them to wait to borrow from anyone but Shylock Levy? Bassanio shifted uncomfortably, but Antonio held Shylock's gaze. I've spoken harshly, perhaps unfairly, but business is business, Shylock. Can you make the loan or not? Shylock walked to the window, looking out at the street, where a cable car clanged past, tourists hanging from its sides. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost musing. You know, Antonio, in the old country, before the fire and the ash, my father owned a jewelry store in Vienna, on the Kearny Street, one of the finest streets in the city. Men like you gentlemen, respected merchants, would come to his store, admire his craftsmanship, buy engagement rings and anniversary gifts. Then, on the street, these same men would spit as they passed him. They would do business with Jews, but they wouldn't drink coffee with us. They needed us, but they despised us. He turned back to face Antonio. You're not as bad as them. You don't spit. You just make your little comments, your jokes at my expense, reminding everyone that I'm different, that I'm lesser. If I've wronged you, I apologize, Antonio said. But my cousin needs this money. I'm asking you as one businessman to another. Shylock looked at Bassanio for the first time, truly seeing him. And who is this? What is the money for? My cousin, Bassanio Ferraro. He wishes to court a respectable woman. He needs proper clothes, proper transportation, the means to present himself well. Love, Shylock said, and something in his face softened. You borrow $3,000 for love. He was quiet for a moment, then moved behind his counter and pulled out a contract form. Very well. I'll loan you the $3,000. And here is what will shock you, Antonio Rossini. I won't charge you a penny of interest. Not 1 cent. Antonio frowned. What's the catch? No catch. Call it a gesture of friendship. You need money. I have money. You've hurt my feelings with your words, but I'm willing to forgive. To show you that Shylock Levy can be as generous as any Christian merchant. He began filling out the contract with a fountain pen, his handwriting precise and elegant. However, just to make our agreement interesting, let's put in a little clause. A formality, you understand. If you fail to repay the $3,000 by, let's say, 3 months from today, February 1st, 1955, then, instead of interest, you'll owe me something else. What? Antonio asked warily. Shylock looked up, and his eyes behind the spectacles were unreadable. 1 controlling share of your import business. Rossini and Sons. You miss the payment, and I become your partner. The shop seemed to grow smaller, the air thicker. Outside, the sounds of Kearny Street continued the rumble of delivery trucks, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant clang of trolley bells. But inside, time had stopped. Bassanio stepped forward quickly. Antonio, no. That's madness. Your business? Everything you've built? But Antonio was studying Shylock's face, searching for the trap, the hidden malice. Why would you want a controlling share in my company? You know nothing about importing Italian goods. Shylock shrugged, continuing to write. I know plenty about business, but you're right. I have no desire to import olive oil and wine, which is why you'll pay me back on time. And this clause will mean nothing. It's a joke, Antonio, a formality. You said yourself your ships are coming in. The Madonna del Mar arrives when? January? You'll have the money with weeks to spare. Then why include it at all? Bassanio demanded. Because I want something from Antonio Rossini that money can't buy. Shylock looked up, and now there was steel in his voice. Respect. When you sign this paper, when you put your business on the line to borrow from me, you're admitting that my money is as good as any bank's, that Shylock Levy is a legitimate businessman, not just some usurer to mock at your fancy dinners. You'll owe me, Antonio. And for 3 months you'll think twice before you make another joke at my expense. Antonio was silent for a long moment. Through the shop window, he could see a Chinese grandmother carrying a chicken in a bamboo cage, a man in a business suit hurrying past with a newspaper under his arm, a young couple window shopping, the girl laughing at something the boy said. Life continuing ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Give me the contract, Antonio said. Antonio, please, Bassanio began. My ships will arrive. They always do. And Bassanio, you'll have your chance at happiness. Antonio took the fountain pen Shylock offered. $3,000, no interest, due February 1st. If I default, you receive 1 controlling share of Rossini and Sons. Correct? Correct. Shylock slid the contract across the counter. Antonio signed with a flourish, his signature bold and confident. Shylock signed as witness, then opened his safe behind the counter and began counting out cash stacks of 20s and 50s, the bills crisp and new. $3,000 in 1954 was a fortune, enough to buy 2 new automobiles or a small house in the Sunset District. There, Shylock said, handing the money to Bassanio. May it bring you the love you seek. And Antonio, I'll see you on February 1st. I'm sure your ships will come in. They always do, don't they? As they left the shop, the bell jangling behind them, Bassanio gripped Antonio's arm. You shouldn't have done that. For me, you shouldn't have risked. Hush. Go rent a decent apartment. Buy clothes that fit. Get a haircut at that barber shop on Union Street, the one where the mayor goes. And then drive up to Belmont, to the Napa Valley, and win your lady's heart. Antonio smiled, but his eyes held that melancholy again, deeper now. Let me worry about my ships. You worry about love. 90 miles north of San Francisco, the Napa Valley spread out in golden autumn splendor. The vineyards that covered the hillsides were beginning their seasonal change, the leaves turning amber and crimson, the harvest completed, the wine aging in oak barrels in cool cellars beneath the earth. This was California wine country, where Italian and French and German immigrants had planted their dreams in the rich soil and watched them grow into something magnificent. The Belmont estate sat on a rise overlooking the valley, a sprawling Mediterranean villa of cream-colored stucco and red tile roofs, surrounded by olive trees and formal gardens where roses bloomed despite the late season. Lorenzo Belmont had built it in the 1920s, when his wines first began winning medals and his fortune was assured. Now Lorenzo was dead, and his daughter Portia lived there alone, except for the servants and her companion, Nerissa. Portia Belmont stood on the terrace that October afternoon, looking out over the vineyards her father had loved. She was 25 years old, tall and elegant. With dark hair, she wore pulled back in the fashion of Grace Kelly, and eyes the color of good sherry. She had her father's intelligence and her late mother's beauty, and she was trapped. "Another one arrived this morning," Nerissa said, coming onto the terrace with a silver tray bearing 2 glasses of lemonade. Nerissa was Portia's age, her closest friend since their days together at Stanford, the daughter of the estate's vineyard manager. She wore a simple blue dress and had a practical, no-nonsense air about her. From Los Angeles this time, some movie producer's son. He sent ahead a telegram announcing his intention to attempt the challenge. Portia accepted the lemonade with a tired smile. "How many does that make? 7? 8, counting the one from Texas, the cattle baron's nephew." Nerissa sat in a wicker chair. "Your father certainly knew how to complicate things, even from beyond the grave. The challenge, the will, Lorenzo Belmont's final joke, or perhaps his final wisdom. Portia's father had died suddenly at 60, his heart giving out as he walked among his vines on a spring morning. The will he left behind was eccentric, to say the least. Portia would inherit everything: the vineyards, the winery, the fortune estimated at over $2 million, but only when she married. And she could only marry a man who passed her father's test. In the cellar beneath the villa were 3 wine vaults, sealed with identical locks. The keys hung in Lorenzo's study, each attached to a small casket, one of gold, one of silver, one of lead. Each casket bore an inscription. A suitor had to choose one casket, and only one contained the key that would unlock the vault holding Lorenzo's blessing and Portia's hand in marriage. Choose wrong, and the suitor had to leave immediately and swear never to court any woman again. It was medieval. It was absurd. It was also legally binding. "Father wanted to make sure I didn't marry some fortune hunter," Portia said, staring out at the vineyards. "He wanted a man who would choose wisely, who would see past the surface to what really mattered. And instead you get a parade of egotistical peacocks who think they can outwit a dead man," Nerissa said. "The movie producer's son will probably choose gold. They always do." Portia laughed despite herself. "Not always. That banker from Sacramento chose silver. He was so confident, so certain he'd found the trick. And inside was a note saying, 'You desire what many desire, fool's silver for a fool's heart.'" Nerissa grinned. I thought he'd cry, but Portia's smile faded. "I don't want any of them, Nerissa. Not the banker or the producer's son or the cattle baron's nephew. They look at me and see dollar signs. They see the vineyards and the villa and the Belmont name, and they think choosing a casket is like picking a horse at the races." "Was there ever anyone you did want?" Nerissa asked gently. Portia was quiet for a moment, then said, 2 years ago, at the charity gala in San Francisco, I met a man named Bassanio. We talked for hours. He was funny and kind, and he didn't know who I was at first. When he found out, he got nervous, started stammering, and then he just disappeared. I never saw him again." "Maybe he'll come back," Nerissa said. "Maybe," Portia said, but she didn't sound hopeful. "Or maybe he's married now, or maybe he was just another man intimidated by the Belmont fortune. Either way, I'm stuck here, waiting for someone to choose the right casket, hoping against hope that whoever wins the key isn't a complete fool or a cruel man or..." she broke off, setting down her lemonade. "I'm 25 years old, and my life is locked in a wine cellar in a lead box. Father, I hope you're laughing, wherever you are." In the distance, a car was climbing the road to the villa, dust rising behind it in the afternoon sun. Another suitor, perhaps. Another man ready to try his luck at Lorenzo Belmont's game. Portia straightened her shoulders and turned to face whatever was coming. The car climbing the dusty road to the Belmont estate was a silver Cadillac Eldorado, its chrome gleaming like a promise. Behind the wheel sat Marcus Whitfield III, heir to a Texas oil fortune, wearing a white Stetson and a suit that cost more than most men earned in 6 months. He was 30 years old, handsome in a square-jawed way, and possessed the absolute confidence of a man who'd never been told no. Portia and Nerissa received him in the great room of the villa, a space with high-beamed ceilings, terracotta floors, and tall windows overlooking the vineyards. A portrait of Lorenzo Belmont hung above the stone fireplace, his painted eyes seeming to watch the proceedings with sardonic amusement. "Miss Belmont," Marcus said, sweeping his hat from his head and executing what he probably thought was a gallant bow. "I've driven all the way from Houston to attempt your father's challenge. I've been successful in every venture I've ever undertaken: oil, wells, cattle, real estate, and I intend to be successful in this as well." "How romantic," Nerissa murmured, barely audible. Portia maintained her gracious smile, the one she'd perfected over the past 6 months. "Mr. Whitfield, you understand the terms? If you choose incorrectly, you must leave immediately and swear never to court any woman again." "Yes, ma'am, I understand. But I won't be choosing incorrectly." He flashed a smile, showing too many white teeth. "I didn't get rich by making bad decisions." They descended to the wine cellar, a cavernous space of stone and shadow where barrel after barrel of aging wine rested in careful rows. The air was cool and smelled of oak and fermentation, earth and time. In a small alcove at the cellar's far end stood 3 caskets on a table draped in burgundy velvet. The gold casket gleamed even in the dim light, ornately decorated with grape clusters and vine leaves. Its inscription read, "Who chooses me shall gain what many men desire." The silver casket was elegant and understated, etched with subtle patterns. It read, "Who chooses me shall get as much as he deserves." The lead casket was plain, almost ugly, its dull gray surface unadorned. Its inscription said, "Who chooses me must give and hazard all he has." Marcus Whitfield circled the table like a hawk eyeing prey. He didn't hesitate long. "Well, that's obvious enough. What many men desire, that's you, Miss Belmont, and your fortune. Gold it is." He reached for the golden casket. Inside was no key. Instead, there was a scroll of paper. Marcus unrolled it, his confident expression crumbling as he read aloud, "All that glitters is not gold." Often have you heard that told? "Many a man his life has sold, but my outside to behold. Gilded tombs do worms enfold." Had you been as wise as bold, young in limbs, in judgment old, your answer had not been enscrolled. Fare you well. Your suit is cold. Portia felt a familiar mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that she wouldn't have to marry this pompous man. Disappointment that once again her prison remained locked. That's impossible," Marcus sputtered. "This is some kind of trick." "No trick, Mr. Whitfield. Only a test you failed. You must honor your oath now and leave." He left in a spray of gravel, his Cadillac roaring back down the mountain road. "Well, Nerissa said as they climbed back to the villa. At least we didn't have to endure dinner with him. In San Francisco, in the apartment above the pawn shop on Kearny Street, a different kind of drama was unfolding. Jessica Levy sat at her vanity, brushing her long dark hair and trying not to let her hands shake. She was 19 years old, beautiful in a quiet way, with her father's brown eyes and her late mother's gentle features. She wore a simple dress of forest green, and hidden in her closet was a suitcase already packed. Tonight. It had to be tonight. Her mother, Rebecca, knocked softly and entered. She was a small woman, worn by years of worry, but still handsome, with kind eyes that had seen too much. "Jessica, your father will be home soon. Come help me with dinner." "Mama, I need to tell you something." Jessica set down the brush, her heart hammering. "I'm leaving. Tonight." Rebecca's face went pale. She sank onto the edge of Jessica's bed. "Lorenzo." It wasn't a question. Rebecca had known, of course. Mothers always knew. Lorenzo Rossi was 26, worked at Antonio Rossini's importing company, managing the warehouse operations, and attended Mass every Sunday at St. Peter and Paul Church in North Beach. He was handsome, devout, ambitious, and utterly unsuitable for Shylock Levy's only daughter. And they had met 6 months earlier at Fisherman's Wharf, when Jessica had been walking alone near the water, and Lorenzo had asked if he could buy her a lemonade. They'd talked for 3 hours, sitting on a bench watching the fishing boats come in. He'd made her laugh. He'd listened when she talked about wanting to study art, to paint, to see beyond the narrow confines of her father's world. They'd been meeting in secret ever since coffee shops in the Sunset District, where no one knew them, walks in Golden Gate Park, stolen hours that tasted of freedom and felt like flight. "Papa will never accept him," Jessica said, her voice breaking. "He'll never accept anyone who isn't Jewish. He'll keep me locked up here forever, helping in the shop, living his fear and his anger." "Your father loves you," Rebecca said softly. "I know, but Mama, his love is a cage. He sees threats everywhere. Every Christian is a potential pogrom, every Gentile and Nazi waiting to happen. I understand why God knows I understand, but I can't live in his past. I can't let his trauma become my prison." Rebecca was crying now, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. "Where will you go?" "Lorenzo has a friend with an apartment in the Mission. We'll get married at City Hall. He has a little money saved." "Mama, I love him. And he loves me, not for Papa's money or anything else, just for me. Your father will sit Shiva for you. He'll mourn you as dead." "I know." Jessica was crying too now, the weight of what she was about to do crushing down on her. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I hope someday he'll understand." From downstairs they heard the shop door open, the bell's familiar jangle. Shylock's voice called up, "Rebecca? Jessica?" "I'm home." Rebecca stood, gripped her daughter's hands tight. "Go then, quickly, before I lose my courage and stop you." She pressed something into Jessica's pawn jewelry, rings, her grandmother's necklace. "Take these, sell them if you need to, and Jessica be happy. That's all a mother really wants." Jessica grabbed her suitcase from the closet, kissed her mother's wet cheek, and slipped out the back door that led to the fire escape. In the alley below, Lorenzo waited beside a borrowed Ford, his face tight with anxiety and hope. She climbed down the iron stairs, her footsteps clanging softly, and dropped into his arms. "Are you sure?" Lorenzo whispered. "I'm sure. Drive. Just drive." They drove west, toward the ocean, toward a future neither could predict leaving behind a father who would discover his daughter's empty room and feel his heart break in ways that even Vienna had never managed. Shylock discovered the empty room at 8 o'clock that evening. He had called for Jessica 3 times, his voice growing more irritated with each unanswered summons. Finally, he'd climbed the narrow stairs to her bedroom and found the door ajar, the room dark, the bed unslept in. On her vanity, propped against the mirror, was a note in her careful handwriting. "Papa, I'm sorry. I love Lorenzo Rossi, and he loves me. We're going to be married. Please try to understand. Please don't hate me. Your daughter, Jessica." Shylock read it once, twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. He stood in the empty room, the note trembling in his hands, and for a long moment he couldn't breathe. The world tilted, and he gripped the vanity to keep from falling. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her face already knowing, already grieving. "You knew?" Shylock said. His voice was hollow, scraped raw. "You knew, and you didn't stop her. How could I stop her? Lock her in her room? She's 19, Shylock. She has a right to her own life." Her own life? With a Christian? With a man who'll make her forget who she is, where she comes from? He crumpled the note in his fist. "After everything we survived, everything we lost, she throws it away for some Italian boy with nice teeth and empty promises. He's a good boy, Shylock. He works hard. He loves her. Good, good." Shylock's voice rose to a roar, something animal and wounded in it. "They'll baptize her. They'll make her eat their communion wafers and kneel in their churches. She'll have babies who won't even know they're Jewish, who won't know what their grandmothers survived, what their ancestors died for." He turned on Rebecca, his face twisted with anguish. "And you helped her. You're no better than—" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. Rebecca's face hardened. "Then what, Shylock? Then a traitor? I'm her mother. I want her to be happy. Something you seem to have forgotten how to want for anyone, including yourself." Shylock stumbled past her, down the stairs, into his shop. The pawned items surrounded him, the watches, the rings, the violin, the Purple Heart medal. All of it the debris of other people's desperation and loss. Was this what he'd built? Was this what he'd saved his daughter for? He went to his safe, opened it with shaking hands. Money, stacks of it. The thing he'd thought would keep them secure, keep them safe from the next catastrophe, the next Vienna. But money hadn't kept Jessica. Money couldn't buy back a daughter who'd fled into the night. In the back of the safe was a photograph, black and white, the edges soft with age. His family in Vienna, 1937. His parents, his brothers, Jessica, as a baby in Rebecca's arms. All of them smiling, not knowing what was coming. Most of them were dead now. And Jessica, his miracle, his one piece of the future she'd chosen to leave. Shylock closed the safe, locked it, and sat in the darkness of his shop, listening to the sounds of Kearny Street outside. Cars passing, voices in Chinese and Italian and English. The city alive and indifferent to his pain. "Jessica," he whispered to the empty room. "Oh, my Jessica." 3 weeks passed. November arrived with crisp mornings and clear blue skies, the kind of California weather that made visitors understand why people called it paradise. In North Beach, Bassanio prepared for his journey to Napa Valley with the careful attention of a soldier preparing for battle. The $3,000 had transformed him. He rented a small but respectable apartment on Telegraph Hill with a view of the bay. He bought 3 good suits from Magnon's on Union Square, 1 charcoal gray, 1 navy blue, 1 lighter for daytime. He got his hair cut by a real barber who knew what he was doing, bought new shoes that actually fit, and rented a sky blue Buick Roadmaster that drove like a dream. But more than the external changes, something had shifted inside him. The desperation that had dogged him for years, the constant scrambling, the debts, the sense of drowning had eased. Not because of the money itself, but because Antonio had believed in him enough to risk everything. That belief was worth more than $3,000. It was worth becoming the man Antonio thought he could be. On a Thursday morning, Bassanio loaded his small suitcase into the Buick's trunk and drove to the pier to say goodbye to Antonio. He found his cousin in the warehouse office, surrounded by bills of lading and manifests, a telephone receiver cradled against his shoulder, as he argued with someone about shipping rates. Antonio hung up, saw Bassanio in the doorway, and smiled. "Look at you," like Cary Grant ready for his close-up. "I have you to thank for all of it," Bassanio said. He crossed the office and embraced his cousin. "Antonio, if this works, if she'll have me—" "When she says yes," Antonio corrected, "you'll bring her back here, and we'll have the biggest wedding North Beach has ever seen. Assuming my ships arrive on time, and I haven't lost my business to Shylock." He said it lightly, but Bassanio heard the edge beneath. "Have you heard from the Madonna del Mar?" Last report had her passing through the Straits of Magellan. She should reach San Francisco Harbor by mid-January, plenty of time. Antonio walked to the window, overlooking the bay. "Though I'll admit the waiting makes me nervous. Everything I have is on those ships. If something happened—" "Nothing will happen. You've been shipping goods for 15 years without incident." "True enough." Antonio turned back, his melancholy lifting. "Now go. Drive carefully. And Bassanio, just be yourself. The man I know, not the desperate fool trying to impress everyone." That's the man she'd fall in love with. Bassanio drove north across the Golden Gate Bridge, that magnificent span of orange steel against blue sky, and up through Marin County into wine country. The November vineyards stretched away on either side of the highway, the vines bare now, skeletal, and waiting for spring. He practiced what he'd say to Portia, discarded it, practiced again. By afternoon, he turned onto the long drive leading to the Belmont estate. His hands were sweating on the steering wheel. The villa appeared ahead, cream stucco and red tiles, surrounded by olive trees and gardens. It was grand, but not ostentatious, beautiful in an understated way that spoke of old money and good taste. A woman appeared on the terrace as he parked the Buick. She was tall and elegant, wearing a simple cream-colored dress, her dark hair pulled back, and for a moment Bassanio couldn't breathe. Even more beautiful than he remembered. Portia recognized him the instant he stepped from the car. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and something that might have been joy. "Bassanio," she called. "Bassanio Ferrara? Is that really you?" He climbed the steps to the terrace, his heart hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Miss Belmont, Portia, I came to attempt your father's challenge. If you'll permit me." Portia's smile was like sunrise breaking over the bay. "Permit you? I've been waiting 2 years for you to come back." They sat on the terrace for an hour, talking like old friends, reunited after war. Nerissa brought them iced tea with fresh mint from the garden and discreetly retreated, though not before catching Portia's eye and giving her an encouraging smile. "I thought about you," Bassanio said, "every day after that gala. But I was broke, Portia. completely broke. I owed money to half of San Francisco. I couldn't come courting you like some beggar asking for handouts. I wouldn't have cared, Portia said softly. But I would have. A man has his pride, even a foolish one. He looked out over the vineyards, gathering courage. My cousin Antonio loaned me money, $3,000. He'd put his entire business on the line so I could come here and try to win you properly. Not as a desperate gambler, but as a man who might actually deserve you. And do you think you deserve me? Portia asked, but there was warmth in her voice, teasing. No, Bassanio said honestly, but I love you. I've loved you since that night we talked about everything and nothing. You told me about wanting to paint the vineyards at sunrise, and I told you about my dreams of opening a restaurant. We talked about books and music and what makes life worth living. You didn't know me, didn't know my debts or my failures, and you liked me anyway. Portia reached across and took his hand. Her fingers were cool and steady. I still like you, Bassanio, more than like, but you understand the terms? My father's will, the 3 caskets, I know. Choose wrong, and I leave forever, and never court another woman. He turned her hand over in his, studying her palm like it held secrets. Portia, if I fail this test, if I choose wrong, at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have spent this one afternoon with you. Then let's not waste any more time, Portia said, standing. Come, face your fate. They descended again to the wine cellar, Nerissa following this time as witness. The 3 caskets sat waiting on their velvet-draped table, unchanged and unchanging. Gold, silver, lead, the same inscriptions, the same mysterious promise. Bassanio stood before them, and Portia held her breath. Who chooses me shall gain what many men desire, Bassanio read from the gold casket. He shook his head. That's not love. That's greed. Many men desire wealth, status, beauty, but those are surfaces. They're not you, Portia. They're what people see from the outside. He moved to the silver. Who chooses me shall get as much as he deserves. Another head shake. Deserve? What an arrogant word. Who decides what anyone deserves? We're all just stumbling through life, trying to be better than we were yesterday. No one deserves love. It's grace, not payment. Finally, he stood before the lead casket. That ugly gray box with its challenging words. Who chooses me must give and hazard all he has. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. That's what Antonio did. He gave and hazarded all he had for me. Not because I deserved it, but because he loved me. And that's what real love is, isn't it? Risk, sacrifice, giving everything and hoping it's enough. He picked up the lead casket. Inside was a small brass key. Portia let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Nerissa clapped her hands together in delight. But Bassanio was reading the scroll that accompanied the key, his eyes scanning the words written in Lorenzo Belmont's careful hand. You that choose not by the view, chance as fair and choose as true. Since this fortune falls to you, be content and seek no new. If you be well pleased with this and hold your fortune for your bliss, turn to where your lady is and claim her with a loving kiss. Bassanio looked up, the key in one hand, the scroll in the other, and found Portia crying. Happy tears, the kind that come when hope you'd stopped believing in suddenly becomes real. I'm not rich, he said. I'm not sophisticated. I've made terrible decisions and wasted opportunities. But I promise you, Portia Belmont, if you'll have me, I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of this moment. Yes, Portia said, laughing through her tears. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. They kissed there in the wine cellar, surrounded by the aging barrels and the stone walls, while Nerissa whistled and applauded. It was not a Hollywood kiss, perfect and choreographed. It was awkward and wonderful, and tasted of salt from Portia's tears and hope from both their hearts. That evening they celebrated on the terrace with champagne from Lorenzo's private reserve. Bassanio called Antonio from the villa's telephone to share the news, and even over the crackling long-distance connection, you could hear the joy in Antonio's voice. "I'm so proud of you, cousin. Bring her home soon. I want to meet the woman who finally tamed Bassanio Ferrara." But after Bassanio hung up, after the laughter and the champagne and the planning of a Christmas wedding, a darker current was moving in San Francisco. At the harbor master's office on the Embarcadero, a telegram arrived from Panama. The Madonna del Mar, rounding Cape Horn in heavy weather, had sent a distress signal. Engine failure, taking on water. The ship was listing badly, and the captain had ordered the cargo jettisoned to stay afloat. The telegram sat on the harbor master's desk, waiting to be delivered in the morning. By the time Antonio would receive it, 3 days would have passed. The Madonna del Mar was still afloat, but the cargo, the wine, the fabric, the goods worth $50,000 that Antonio had counted on to repay Shylock, was at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, and the second ship, the San Giuseppe crossing from Marseille, had not been heard from in 2 weeks. Radio silence. In the shipping business, radio silence was never good news. In his apartment above the pawn shop on Kearny Street, Shylock Levy sat at his kitchen table with the contract Antonio had signed, reading it over and over by lamplight. February 1st, less than 3 months away. If Antonio's ships failed to arrive, if the merchant couldn't repay the loan, then Rossini and Sons would belong to Shylock. The business that had excluded him, mocked him, looked down on him, it would be his. Part of him hoped Antonio would succeed. Part of him hoped the ships would come in laden with goods, and the debt would be paid, and this strange chapter would close peacefully. But another part, the part that had lost his daughter to a Christian boy, the part that remembered Vienna and every slight and humiliation, since that part wanted Antonio to fail, wanted him to know what loss felt like, wanted him to understand that Shylock Levy was not a man to be mocked or dismissed. He folded the contract carefully and placed it in his safe, beside the photograph of his family that would never be whole again. Outside, the November fog rolled in from the bay, wrapping San Francisco in white silence. December arrived cold and clear, with Christmas decorations appearing in shop windows along Market Street, and carols playing from tinny speakers in department stores. In the Napa Valley, Portia and Bassanio were planning a wedding for the day after Christmas, and the villa buzzed with preparations. In San Francisco, Antonio Rossini's world was quietly collapsing. The telegram about the Madonna del Mar arrived on December 3rd. Antonio read it 3 times in his warehouse office, the paper crinkling in his grip. Cargo lost, ship damaged. Limping toward Panama for repairs. The wine he'd counted on, the goods worth $50,000 gone. But he still had the San Giuseppe. 1 ship's cargo would be enough to cover the debt to Shylock and maintain his business operations until the Madonna del Mar could be repaired and returned to service. He tried to tell himself it would be fine. Ships encountered trouble. This was the nature of maritime commerce. Risk and reward, storm and sunshine. On December 10th, the harbor master called Antonio personally. The news was worse. The San Giuseppe had been found adrift off the coast of Portugal by a British naval vessel. Fire in the engine room. The crew had been rescued by a passing freighter, but the ship itself had been abandoned and was being towed to Lisbon. The cargo, damaged by fire and seawater, was a total loss. Antonio hung up the telephone and sat very still in his office. Through the window he could see the bay, the water gray and choppy under winter clouds. 2 ships lost. Not completely, the vessels themselves could be salvaged, repaired, returned to service eventually. But the cargo, the immediate capital, he needed gone. He did the mathematics in his head. His cash reserves could cover his warehouse workers' salaries through January, pay the rent on his pier space, handle the daily operational expenses. What, $3,000 for Shylock by February 1st? Impossible. He'd have to sell the business itself to raise that kind of money, and even then, the realization hit him like a fist to the stomach. The contract, the clause. 1 controlling share of Rossini and Sons if he defaulted. Shylock wouldn't need to buy the business. He'd already own it. Antonio stood, grabbed his coat and fedora, and walked out into the cold December afternoon. He needed air. He needed to think. The waterfront streets were busy with longshoremen and sailors, with women carrying shopping bags full of Christmas presents, with children running and laughing. Life continuing, ordinary and oblivious. He found himself at a bar on Broadway, a dingy place that smelled of cigarettes and spilled beer. He ordered whiskey and sat at the counter, trying to figure out how to tell Bassanio that his cousin's happiness had cost Antonio everything. In Belmont, unaware of the disaster unfolding 90 miles south, Bassanio and Portia were addressing wedding invitations in the villa's library. A fire crackled in the fireplace, and outside the bare vineyard stood in orderly rows under a pale winter sun. "We should invite your cousin Antonio to stay here for a week before the wedding," Portia said, sealing an envelope. "I want to properly thank the man who made this possible." "He'd like that," Bassanio said, but something in his voice made Portia look up. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, just thinking about Antonio. He's been alone for so long, no wife, no children. His whole life is that business." Bassanio set down his pen. "Sometimes I wonder if he's happy, really happy. He's generous to everyone else, but what does he keep for himself?" Portia reached across and touched his hand. "After we're married, we'll make sure he knows he's family, that he always has a place here with us." Bassanio squeezed her fingers, grateful. But a small worm of worry had lodged itself in his mind. He'd tried calling Antonio twice in the past week, and both times the warehouse secretary had said Antonio was out. The third time he'd reached his cousin, but Antonio had sounded strange, distracted, his voice flat. "The ships?" Bassanio had asked. "They're still on schedule?" "Everything's fine," Antonio had said. "Don't worry about me. Focus on your wedding." But Bassanio knew his cousin, knew when Antonio was hiding something. He made a mental note to drive down to San Francisco after Christmas, before the wedding, just to check in. In the apartment above the pawn shop, Jessica and Lorenzo celebrated their first month of marriage with a quiet dinner in their tiny kitchen in the Mission District. Jessica had cut her long hair into a fashionable bob, and she wore a simple gold cross Lorenzo had given her, not because she'd converted, not yet, but because she loved the gesture. The cross felt like a bridge between her old life and her new one. "Have you thought any more about contacting your father?" Lorenzo asked, serving pasta onto chipped plates they'd bought second-hand. Jessica's smile faded. "Every day. But Mama said he won't see me, that he's sitting Shiva, mourning me as if I died. You're not dead. You're right here. Lorenzo's frustration was evident. He'd never understood the depth of Shylock's pain, the weight of history that made Jessica's defection feel like another Holocaust to a man who'd survived the first one. To him, I might as well be, Jessica said softly. She twisted the cross on its chain. He sees this marriage as a betrayal of everything we survived. And maybe he's right. Maybe I am betraying. No, Lorenzo said firmly. He knelt beside her chair. You're not betraying anyone. You're living your life. Choosing your own path. That's not betrayal, that's courage. But Jessica wasn't sure anymore. At night, she dreamed of her father in his shop, surrounded by pawned treasures and broken dreams. She dreamed of her mother crying alone in the apartment. And she woke up wondering if love was supposed to hurt this much. December 20th arrived with rain lashing San Francisco's streets, turning the hills slick and dangerous. Antonio received a visitor at his warehouse, a shipping insurance adjuster, a thin man with a briefcase and bad news. I'm sorry, Mr. Rossini, but the policies on both vessels had lapsed. You missed the premium payment in September. Antonio stared at him. That's impossible. I always pay. Your secretary was supposed to process it, but there seems to have been a confusion with the paperwork. The insurance company sent notices, but the adjuster shrugged apologetically. Without coverage, we can't compensate you for the lost cargo. After the man left, Antonio sat in the gathering darkness of his office, listening to rain drum on the warehouse roof. No insurance, no cargo, no capital. He picked up the telephone and called Bassanio in Napa Valley. Cousin, I need you to listen to me carefully, Antonio said when Bassanio answered. The ships have failed. Both of them. The cargo is lost, and I have no insurance. I can't repay Shylock by February 1st. There was a long silence on the line. Then Bassanio's voice tight with panic. How much do you need? Portia has money. We can sell some property. We can. No, this is my debt, my responsibility. I won't start your marriage by making you beg your wife for money to save me. Antonio, he'll take your business. I know. Antonio's voice was calm now, resigned. Maybe that's justice. I mocked him, dismissed him, treated him as lesser. Now he'll own everything I've built. There's a certain poetry in it. Don't talk like that. We'll figure something out. I'm coming down there tomorrow. No, you stay there. You marry that beautiful woman. You be happy, Bassanio. That's all I ask. Let my risk mean something. Let it have purchased your happiness, at least. Antonio hung up before Bassanio could argue further. Bassanio drove through the rain to San Francisco the next morning, despite Antonio's protests, the Buick's wipers beating a frantic rhythm against the downpour. Portia sat beside him, her face determined, a leather briefcase on her lap, containing documents and her father's legal papers. She'd insisted on coming, and Bassanio had learned already that when Portia Belmont made up her mind, arguing was pointless. There has to be a legal way out of this, she said as they crossed the Golden Gate Bridge, the towers disappearing into low clouds. Contracts can be challenged, terms can be disputed. My father taught me that much about business law. They found Antonio in his warehouse office, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His suit was rumpled, his face unshaven, and his eyes held a hollow quality that frightened Bassanio more than any words could. You shouldn't have come, Antonio said, but he embraced them both anyway. Portia wasted no time. She spread the contract out on Antonio's desk, reading it carefully with a lawyer's attention to detail. This clause about the controlling share, it's unusual, but not illegal. However, there might be grounds to argue unconscionability. No reasonable person would agree to risk their entire business for a loan without interest. I agreed to it, Antonio said, in front of witnesses. I signed willingly. Under duress, possibly. We could argue that Shylock manipulated. No. Antonio's voice was firm. I won't win my freedom by claiming I'm too stupid to understand what I signed. I knew exactly what I was doing. I gambled and lost. Bassanio paced the office like a caged animal. Then we'll get the money somewhere else. We'll borrow from banks, from other merchants. Between the three of us. I've tried, Antonio said quietly. Word has gotten out about the ships. Banks won't loan to a merchant with 2 vessels in dry dock and no cargo. Other merchants see me as a bad risk now. And I won't take money from your wife, Bassanio. Some things matter more than business. A knock at the door interrupted them. Antonio's secretary, an older Italian woman named Rosa, poked her head in. Mr. Rossini, there's a man here to see you. Shylock Levy. The three of them went still. Then Antonio straightened his shoulders, smoothed his rumpled suit as best he could. Send him in. Shylock entered carrying an umbrella and wearing a long black coat beaded with rain. He looked older than when Bassanio had seen him at the pawn shop, his face more lined, his eyes harder. He nodded to the group, his gaze lingering on Portia with curiosity. Antonio, I heard about your ships. Bad luck. Yes, Antonio said. Bad luck. I came to discuss our contract. February 1st is 6 weeks away. I assume you won't be able to pay. You assume correctly. Shylock pulled the contract from his coat pocket, unfolded it. Then on February 1st, 1 controlling share of Rossini and Sons becomes mine. I'll own 51% of your business. You'll work for me, Antonio. You'll import what I tell you to import, sell to whom I tell you to sell. Every decision will require my approval. Bassanio stepped forward. We'll get you the money. Give us more time. The contract specifies February 1st. No extensions. Shylock's voice was cold, mechanical. Besides, why would I want money? I have money. What I want is justice. Justice? Antonio's laugh was bitter. Is that what you call revenge? Call it what you like. Shylock's composure cracked, and suddenly the pain beneath showed through. You mocked me, Antonio. For years. You made jokes at my expense, questioned my character, advised people not to do business with me. You made me feel small, less than, not worthy of respect. So you'll destroy my life to soothe your wounded pride? My wounded, Shylock's face flushed red. You don't understand anything. My daughter is gone. Jessica, my only child, ran away with a Christian boy. She converted, Antonio. She wears their cross around her neck and probably eats their communion bread and forgets she's even Jewish. I lost her because she wanted to escape me, escape the walls I built to keep her safe. The office was silent except for rain against the windows and the distant sound of ships' horns in the bay. I'm sorry about your daughter, Antonio said, and he sounded like he meant it. Truly. But my business didn't take her from you. No, but you represent everything that did. The world that tells us we're different, we're less, we don't belong. You borrow from banks at 3%. I borrow from no one, because no one will loan to me. You join clubs and societies. I'm blackballed from all of them. You walk through this city like you own it, and men like me walk through it knowing we're only tolerated. Shylock refolded the contract. So yes, Antonio, I want your business. I want you to know what it feels like to be powerless, to have something precious taken from you. Portia had been listening quietly, studying Shylock with intelligent eyes. Now she spoke, her voice calm and measured. Mr. Levy, what if there was a way to resolve this that gave you what you need without destroying Antonio? What if... There is no other way, miss. I'm sorry. I don't know who you are. Portia Belmont, Bassanio's fiancée. And I think there might be a solution, but it requires going through proper legal channels. Would you agree to let a judge review the contract? Shylock studied her, seeing the intelligence behind the beauty. You mean take this to court? Fine, I welcome it. Let a judge confirm that the contract is legal and binding. Let everyone see that Shylock Levy isn't some second-class citizen whose agreements can be dismissed when they become inconvenient. Then we'll see you in court, Portia said. January 15th. That gives us time to prepare, and it's before the February 1st deadline. Shylock nodded. January 15th? I'll bring my lawyers. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Antonio, I don't hate you. I want you to understand that. I just need you to lose something that matters the way I've lost things that matter. Maybe then you'll understand what it's like to be Shylock Levy. He left, his footsteps echoing down the warehouse stairs. Bassanio exploded the moment he was gone. A trial, Portia? What are you thinking? The contract is legal. A judge will side with him. But Portia was smiling, a small, mysterious smile. Not if we're very careful about how we argue the case. Bassanio, Antonio, trust me. I learned a few things at Stanford besides literature. My father made sure I understood contract law. He said it was the most important education a wealthy woman could have. She gathered up the papers. We have 3 weeks. I need to make some calls, do some research, and prepare very carefully. But I think I see a way through this. Antonio looked at her with something like hope flickering in his exhausted eyes. You really think you can win? I don't know about winning, Portia said. But I know about finding the truth hiding in the details. And Mr. Levy's contract has some very interesting details indeed. The days between Christmas and the trial passed in a blur of activity. Bassanio and Portia postponed their wedding. We'll marry when this is settled, Portia had said firmly, and moved into a hotel near Union Square so Portia could be close to the San Francisco Law Library. She spent 12 hours a day there, surrounded by legal volumes and precedent cases, making notes in her precise handwriting, building her strategy piece by careful piece. Nerissa came down from Belmont to help, and proved surprisingly useful. She'd been studying to be a legal secretary before her father's death forced her to take work at the villa, and she remembered enough to assist with research and citations. The 2 women worked side by side like generals planning a campaign. Antonio tried to continue business as usual, but his heart wasn't in it. The Santa Lucia sat at dock, and he couldn't afford to send her back to Italy for another cargo load. His workers watched him with worried eyes, knowing their jobs depended on the outcome of the trial. He'd already had to let 3 men go, good men with families, and the guilt ate at him. On New Year's Eve, instead of celebrating, Antonio walked alone through North Beach, past the restaurants where couples laughed and drank champagne, past Saints Peter and Paul Church, where he'd been baptized 42 years earlier. He found himself thinking about Shylock's words. Had he been cruel? He thought he was just being honest, calling out what he saw as unfair practices. But maybe Shylock was right. Maybe Antonio had been blind to his own privilege, to the way doors opened for him that stayed closed to others. The night was cold and clear, and from Telegraph Hill you could see the whole bay spread out below, the lights of the city reflecting on black water. Antonio stood there for a long time, smoking a cigarette and wondering if losing his business might actually be the right outcome, a kind of justice he hadn't known he owed. Across town in the Mission District apartment, Jessica stood at the window watching fireworks explode over the bay, marking the arrival of 1955. Lorenzo had gone to buy champagne, and she was alone with her thoughts and her guilt. She'd tried twice to see her father. Both times she'd stood outside the pawn shop on Kearny Street, watching through the window as Shylock moved among his merchandise, looking older and more bent than she remembered. Both times her courage had failed, and she'd walked away. The apartment they shared was small but clean, with second-hand furniture and cheerful yellow curtains Jessica had sewn herself. Lorenzo worked hard at the warehouse, and his boss, Antonio Rossini, had been kind to them, giving Lorenzo extra shifts, even a small bonus at Christmas. They were happy, or should have been, but happiness felt like betrayal when she knew her father was suffering. A knock at the door startled her. When she opened it, her mother stood in the hallway, wrapped in a heavy coat, carrying a small suitcase. "Mama," Jessica pulled her inside. "What are you as Papa? Your father doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm visiting my sister in Oakland." Rebecca looked around the apartment, taking in the details of her daughter's new life. "I couldn't stay away anymore, Jessica. I needed to see you, to see that you're really all right." They held each other and cried, mother and daughter bridging the gulf that Shylock's pain had carved between them. When Lorenzo returned with champagne, he found them at the kitchen table, holding hands and talking softly in Yiddish, sharing the language that connected them to something older than geography. "Mrs. Levy," Lorenzo said, setting down the bottle carefully, "I'm so glad you came. I want you to know I love your daughter. I'll take care of her." "Oh, I know," Rebecca said. She studied him with the measuring gaze of mothers everywhere. "I see it, how you look at her. My husband, he can't see past his fear and his history. But I see you're a good boy. A mensch, we would say. Tell me about Papa," Jessica said. "Please, is he eating? Is he sleeping?" Rebecca's face darkened. "He's becoming someone I don't recognize. This trial, this need for revenge against Antonio Rossini, it's consuming him. He sits up at night reading the contract, planning what he'll do when he owns the business. It's like he thinks destroying Antonio will somehow bring you back." "I could go to him," Jessica said. "If it would help Antonio, if it would—" "No," Rebecca said firmly. "That would only make things worse. He'd see it as manipulation, another betrayal. Your father has to find his own way through this darkness. We can't drag him out." They spent New Year's Eve together, the three of them, drinking champagne and trying to pretend the world outside didn't exist. At midnight, fireworks painted the sky in colors bright enough to momentarily erase the shadows. January 15th arrived gray and cold, with wind whipping off the bay and rattling the windows of the Superior Court building on McAllister Street. The courtroom was old San Francisco, all dark wood and brass fixtures, with American and California flags flanking the judge's bench. It smelled of floor wax and old paper, and the accumulated weight of 10,000 judgments. Antonio arrived early with Bassanio, both men wearing their best suits. They looked like they were attending a funeral their own. Portia and Nerissa came separately, and Portia had transformed herself. Gone was the casual elegance of the villa. Now she wore a severe black suit with a white blouse, her hair pinned back tightly, a pair of reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked like a lawyer, moved like a lawyer, and when she spoke to the bailiff, her voice had acquired a clipped, professional tone. "Miss Belmont will be representing you today," she told Antonio. "That's what we'll tell the judge. I've prepared all the paperwork. Technically, I'm not a licensed attorney, but California law allows for representation by any competent adult in civil cases if both parties agree." "Will Shylock agree?" Bassanio asked. "He will if he thinks he's already won," Portia said. "Men like him, men who've been underestimated their whole lives, sometimes underestimate others in return." Shylock arrived with 2 lawyers in expensive suits, men from a downtown firm who specialized in contract law. They looked confident, well-fed, sure of their victory. Shylock himself wore his best suit, the yarmulke on his head a quiet statement of identity in a courtroom full of Christians. When he saw that Portia would be representing Antonio, his eyebrows rose, but he nodded agreement. What harm could one woman do, even an educated one? The contract was ironclad. The law was clear. Judge Harold Morrison took the bench at 10 o'clock sharp. He was 65, white-haired, with a face that had seen everything and been surprised by nothing. He'd been on the bench for 20 years, and he ran his courtroom with efficiency and fairness. "The case of Levy versus Rossini," he announced, regarding enforcement of a contractual obligation. "Mr. Levy, your lawyers may present your case." Shylock's lead attorney stood, and the trial began. Shylock's attorney was named Gerald Hutchins, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a voice trained to fill courtrooms. He presented the case with clinical precision, laying out the facts like a surgeon arranging instruments on a tray. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of contract enforcement. On October 25, 1954, my client Shylock Levy loaned the defendant Antonio Rossini $3,000. The terms were clear and agreed upon by both parties. Mr. Rossini was to repay the full amount by February 1, 1955. In the event of default, Mr. Levy would receive one controlling share 51% ownership of the defendant's business, Rossini and Sons." Hutchins held up the contract, showing it to the judge. Both parties signed willingly. There was no coercion, no fraud, no misrepresentation. Mr. Rossini is a sophisticated businessman who understood exactly what he was agreeing to. Now, having failed to meet his obligations, he seeks to escape the consequences through legal maneuvering. "We ask that the court enforce the contract as written," he called Shylock to the stand. Under oath, Shylock testified about the loan, about Antonio's agreement to the terms, about his own right to collect what was owed. His voice was steady, factual, but underneath ran a current of something deeper, a need not just for the business, but for acknowledgment, for proof that his agreements mattered as much as any other man's. "Mr. Levy," Hutchins asked, "did you at any point force or manipulate Mr. Rossini into signing this contract?" "No. I offered the loan with no interest. I was being generous. And the clause about the business ownership, you explained it clearly?" "I did." Antonio understood completely. He chose to sign. When it was Portia's turn to cross-examine, she stood slowly, adjusting her glasses. She approached the witness stand with measured steps, and there was something in her bearing that made even Judge Morrison lean forward slightly. "Mr. Levy, you said you were being generous, a loan with no interest. Why?" Shylock hesitated. "I wanted to show that I could be as generous as any Christian merchant." So this was about proving something, about making a point. I suppose it was. And the clause about taking Mr. Rossini's business if he defaulted, was that generous? It was fair. A businessman accepts risk. Antonio accepted this risk. Portia walked back to her table, picked up a piece of paper. "Mr. Levy, you testified that you've been excluded from banks, from clubs, from opportunities. You've faced prejudice. Would you say you've suffered in this community?" Shylock's lawyers objected. "Relevance, Your Honor?" But Judge Morrison waved them down. "I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Levy." "Yes," Shylock said quietly. "I've suffered. My whole life I've been made to feel like an outsider, like I don't belong. And has Mr. Rossini contributed to that suffering? Has he said things, done things that hurt you?" Shylock's jaw tightened. "Yes, he's mocked me, called my business practices criminal, advised people not to borrow from me, made me feel small. So this contract, this clause, it's not really about the money or even the business, is it? It's about making Antonio Rossini feel what you felt, about revenge. It's about justice." Shylock's voice rose, and in it was years of accumulated pain. "It's about consequences, about a man keeping his word. Antonio signed that contract freely. Now he has to honor it, even if honoring it destroys him. He was willing to risk everything for his cousin's happiness. Well, he lost. That's not my fault." Portia let the words hang in the air. Then she returned to her table and whispered something to Nerissa, who handed her another document. "No further questions for this witness, Your Honor." Hutchins called Antonio to the stand next. Antonio swore the oath, his hand steady on the Bible, and sat in the witness chair looking like a man who'd already accepted his fate. "Mr. Rossini," Hutchins said, "did you sign this contract of your own free will?" "I did." "Did you understand the terms?" "I did." "And you agreed that if you failed to repay the loan by February 1st, Mr. Levy would receive controlling ownership of your business?" "Yes, I understood. Do you have the $3,000 to repay Mr. Levy?" Antonio's voice was barely audible. "No, I don't." "Then by the terms you agreed to, Mr. Levy should receive what was promised." "Correct." Antonio looked at Shylock across the courtroom. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or understanding of how they'd arrived at this moment. "Correct," Antonio said. Hutchins smiled, satisfied. "No further questions." Portia approached for cross-examination, but her questions were brief. "Mr. Rossini, why did you agree to such unusual terms? Why risk your business?" "My cousin needed help. I love him. I thought my ships would arrive in time. I was wrong. And if you could go back, would you still sign?" Antonio thought about this. "Yes, some things are worth the risk." Portia nodded. "Thank you. That's all." The judge called for closing arguments. Hutchins went first, reiterating the binding nature of contracts, the importance of enforcing agreed-upon terms, the danger of allowing defendants to escape their obligations simply because the consequences had become inconvenient. Then it was Portia's turn. She stood, and the courtroom seemed to grow quieter, as if everyone sensed something important was about to happen. "Your Honor," she began, "I don't dispute that the contract is valid. I don't claim Mr. Rossini was coerced or deceived. The contract is legal, binding, and clear. Mr. Levy is entitled to what was promised. Bassanio's head snapped up, his face stricken. What was she doing? Conceding? But Portia continued, her voice gaining strength. The contract states that if Mr. Rossini defaults, Mr. Levy shall receive one controlling share of Rossini and Sons. Not money, not liquidated assets, not property, but one share of the business. And here, Your Honor, is where the law becomes very precise, very particular, and very important. She held up the contract, pointing to the specific clause. Mr. Levy is entitled to exactly what is written here. One share. Nothing more, nothing less. But what Mr. Levy is actually seeking is not a share, it's control. It's the power to run the business, to make decisions, to employ Mr. Rossini as a subordinate. And that, Your Honor, is not what the contract says. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Morrison leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. Shylock's lawyers exchanged uncertain glances. Hutchins stood quickly. Your Honor, this is semantics. The contract clearly states a controlling share 51%. That's standard business language. Is it in the contract? Portia asked, her voice sharp. Show me where it says 51%. Show me where it specifies any percentage at all. Judge Morrison extended his hand. Let me see that contract. Portia brought it to him, pointing to the relevant clause. The judge read it carefully, adjusted his glasses, read it again. When he looked up, his expression was thoughtful. Miss Belmont, continue your argument. Your Honor, the contract says one controlling share, not controlling interest, not majority ownership. One share. Now, in corporate law, a controlling share typically refers to the largest single block of stock when no other shareholder holds more. But Rossini and Sons isn't a corporation with multiple shareholders. It's a sole proprietorship owned entirely by Antonio Rossini. There are no shares to distribute. Shylock stood up in the gallery. That's a technicality. The intent was clear. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. Mr. Levy, sit down. You'll have your chance to respond. But Portia wasn't finished. Even if we interpret one controlling share generously, it still doesn't specify what percentage that share represents. Is it 51%? 60%? 99%? The contract is ambiguous on this crucial point. And Your Honor, under California contract law, ambiguous terms must be interpreted against the party who drafted them. Mr. Levy drafted this contract. He chose these words. Hutchins was on his feet again. Your Honor, the intent. The intent isn't written in the contract, Portia interrupted, and the law requires precision. But let's say for argument's sake that the court decides Mr. Levy is entitled to some ownership stake in the business. There's still another problem. A much bigger problem. She returned to her table and picked up a different document, a thick legal volume marked with paper tabs. California Corporate Code, Section 421. Any transfer of business ownership exceeding 50% requires the filing of specific documents with the state, payment of transfer taxes, and approval by the Department of Corporations. These requirements exist to prevent exactly this kind of situation, using debt as a weapon to seize businesses without proper legal process. She showed the statute to the judge. No such documents were filed. No transfer taxes were paid. No approval was sought. Therefore, even if Mr. Levy is entitled to ownership, the transfer cannot legally occur without following the proper procedures. and those procedures, Your Honor, typically take 6 to 9 months to complete." Judge Morrison was reading the statute, now his finger tracing the lines of text. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. Shylock's face had gone pale, and his lawyers were frantically flipping through their own legal books. "Furthermore," Portia said, pressing her advantage, "if the court forces Mr. Rossini to transfer his business without following proper procedure, it sets a dangerous precedent. Any creditor could craft similar contracts, bypassing state regulations designed to protect businesses and workers. Mr. Rossini employs 15 men, Your Honor. 15 families depend on his business. Should their livelihoods be sacrificed because of one ambiguously worded contract?" She let that sink in, then continued more softly. "But there's something else at stake here. Something beyond law. Mr. Levy spoke of justice, and he's right to seek it. He's been wronged. He's been mocked and excluded and made to feel less than. Antonio Rossini admits to contributing to that pain. But Your Honor, is the remedy for injustice more injustice? Is the answer to suffering to make others suffer?" She turned to face Shylock directly. "Mr. Levy, you came to America to escape persecution, to find safety, to build a life where your daughter could grow up free, and you succeeded. You survived. You built a business. You raised a beautiful daughter. But now that daughter has fled from you, not because you weren't strong enough, but because your pain became a prison she couldn't bear. You have no right," Shylock began, but Portia spoke over him, her voice gentle now, almost pleading. "I have every right to speak about the cost of revenge, because I've seen it. My father was consumed by fear after my mother died. Fear that I'd marry the wrong man, make the wrong choice, lose the fortune he'd built. So he created that test, those caskets, trying to control my future from beyond the grave. But you know what? The test worked, not because it kept the wrong man away, but because it showed me who had the wisdom to look past surfaces, to choose substance over show, to risk rather than grasp." She walked back toward the judge. "Antonio Rossini chose lead over gold. He chose to risk everything for love, not romantic love, but the love of family. And he lost. But does that mean he deserves to be destroyed? Does Mr. Levy deserve to become the very thing he hates, a man who uses power to make others feel small?" "Your Honor," Hutchins said desperately, "this is irrelevant to—" "No," Judge Morrison said quietly. "It's not irrelevant. Continue, Miss Belmont." "The law," Portia said, "is supposed to deliver justice, not facilitate revenge. The contract is ambiguous. The transfer would violate state regulations. And even if we could find a way to enforce it technically, doing so would be morally wrong. It would reward cruelty and punish generosity. It would tell every kind person in California that helping others is dangerous, that charity is foolishness, that we should all protect ourselves first and care for each other never." She placed both hands on the judge's bench, looking up at him with absolute conviction. "I'm asking the court to find that while Mr. Levy is owed the debt, $3,000 plus reasonable interest, he is not entitled to seize Antonio Rossini's business through a poorly drafted contract that violates state transfer regulations. I'm asking the court to give Mr. Rossini time to pay the debt properly, with dignity, and to give Mr. Levy what he really needs, not revenge, but recognition that he deserves fair treatment, that his contracts matter, that he is equal before the law." She stepped back. "The quality of mercy is not strained. It falls like gentle rain on everyone beneath it. Mr. Levy deserves mercy, and so does Antonio Rossini. Justice without mercy is just another kind of cruelty. I ask the court to be wiser than that. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Morrison banged his gavel, calling for order, but his eyes were thoughtful, troubled, searching. Judge Morrison called for a 30-minute recess. The courtroom emptied into the hallway, where people clustered in groups, arguing about what they'd just witnessed. Bassanio grabbed Portia's arm, his eyes shining. "You were brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Don't celebrate yet," Portia said, though she allowed herself a small smile. Morrison is a careful judge. He could still rule for Shylock on the pure letter of the contract. Antonio stood apart from them by a window overlooking the street below. He looked exhausted but somehow lighter, as if Portia's words had lifted some weight he'd been carrying. When the bailiff called them back inside, he walked to the defense table with his head held high. Judge Morrison returned to the bench, carrying a yellow legal pad covered with notes. The courtroom fell silent as he settled into his chair and surveyed the assembled group. "I've been on this bench for 20 years, he began, "and this case is one of the strangest I've encountered. Not because of the facts business, disputes happen every day, but because of what it reveals about how we treat each other in this city, in this country." He looked at Shylock. "Mr. Levy, you've suffered real injustice. Miss Belmont is right about that. You've been excluded, mocked, and treated as less than equal. And Antonio Rossini has contributed to that treatment." His testimony made that clear. "For that, Mr. Rossini, you should be ashamed." Antonio nodded, accepting the rebuke. "However," the judge continued, "the question before this court is not whether Mr. Rossini is a good man or a bad man. It's whether this contract can be enforced as written. And having reviewed the relevant statutes and the contract language itself, I find that it cannot." Shylock's face collapsed. His lawyers leaned toward each other, whispering urgently. "The contract states one controlling share, but fails to define what that means in the context of a sole proprietorship. It makes no mention of percentage voting rights or operational control. Under California law, such ambiguity must be resolved against the drafter, in this case, Mr. Levy. More importantly, any business transfer exceeding 25% ownership requires compliance with state filing requirements, none of which have been met here." Judge Morrison set down his notes. "Therefore, I rule that Mr. Levy is not entitled to ownership of Rossini and Sons. However, the underlying debt remains valid. Mr. Rossini borrowed $3,000 and has not repaid it. He owes that sum plus reasonable interest, let's say 5%, given the original no-interest terms. That comes to $3,150. He turned to Antonio. "Mr. Rossini, you have until June 1st, 1955 to repay this debt. That gives you 4 additional months to repair your ships and resume operations. If you fail to pay by that date, Mr. Levy may pursue standard collection remedies garnishment, liens on property, but not seizure of the business itself. Is that clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Antonio said, his voice thick with relief. "Mr. Levy, do you understand the ruling?" Shylock stood slowly. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. "I understand. The law protects him, not me." "As always." "That's not," Judge Morrison began, but Shylock was already gathering his papers. "No, Your Honor, I understand perfectly. The contract I wrote in good faith isn't good enough. The terms I offered generously are too ambiguous. Antonio Rossini mocks me for years, but when I seek remedy, suddenly we must speak of mercy and justice and moral obligations. His voice was bitter, broken. I came to this country believing the law was equal for everyone. I was wrong. He walked toward the courtroom doors, his lawyers hurrying after him. But before he left, he turned back one last time. Antonio, you've won. Congratulations, you'll rebuild your business, and I'll get my $3,000 eventually, and everything will return to normal. Except nothing is normal. My daughter is gone, my wife barely speaks to me, and now I've become exactly what you always said I was, a bitter old Jew seeking revenge. I hope you're satisfied. The doors swung shut behind him with a hollow thud. The courtroom slowly emptied. Judge Morrison congratulated Portia on her argument, and several lawyers who'd been watching from the gallery introduced themselves, impressed by her skill. But Portia felt no triumph. Victory tasted like ash. Outside on the courthouse steps, rain had begun to fall again, cold and relentless. Antonio stood under the portico, staring out at the gray city. I should feel relieved, he said when Bassanio and Portia joined him. I should be celebrating, but all I feel is tired. You won, Bassanio said. You kept your business. Did I win? Or did Shylock lose? There's a difference. Antonio turned to Portia. Thank you. You saved me. But I keep thinking about what he said, about becoming what I always accused him of being. Did I do that to him? Did I push him into this? You both pushed each other, Portia said gently. You with your judgments, him with his contract. But Antonio, it's not too late. The debt is payable. The business is saved. You have 4 months to make things right. And Shylock? How does he make things right? None of them had an answer for that. In a coffee shop on Market Street, Shylock sat alone at a back table, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. His lawyers had left after expressing their disappointment with the ruling. Now he was alone with his thoughts and his shame. He'd wanted justice. He'd wanted Antonio to understand what loss felt like. Instead, he'd proven every stereotype true: the vengeful Jew, the heartless moneylender, the outsider who couldn't assimilate. He'd become the villain in his own story. Through the coffee shop window, he watched people hurrying past in the rain, living their ordinary lives, carrying their ordinary problems. Somewhere out there, Jessica was living too, with her Christian husband, building a life that didn't include him. He'd lost her trying to protect her, and then he'd tried to fill that loss by destroying someone else. What had it accomplished? Nothing. Less than nothing. Shylock paid for his coffee and walked out into the rain, letting it soak through his coat, not caring anymore. He walked without direction, without purpose, just moving through the city that had never quite felt like home. And in that rain, something in him finally broke, not with dramatic fury, but with quiet, devastating completeness. He'd been carrying Vienna with him for 17 years, carrying the fear and the loss and the determination never to be vulnerable again. But vulnerability had found him anyway, in the shape of a daughter who chose love over safety, and a contract that revealed his own capacity for cruelty. He couldn't carry it anymore. The weight was too much. Shylock made his way back to Kearny Street, to the pawn shop, to the apartment above where Rebecca waited. When he opened the door, she looked up from her sewing, saw his face, and set everything aside. Shylock, she said simply. And for the first time since Vienna, since Jessica's flight, since everything that had hardened him into stone, Shylock Levy wept. February arrived with the first hints of spring cherry blossoms beginning to bloom in Golden Gate Park, tulips pushing through the soil in Union Square gardens, and the kind of clear blue skies that made San Franciscans forget the winter rains entirely. The city was waking up, shaking off the cold, and on a Tuesday morning, the Santa Lucia sailed out of harbor toward Italy, her hold empty but her engine running strong. Antonio stood on the pier watching her go, his first ship returning to service. The Madonna del Mar had been repaired in Panama and would arrive home within a month. The San Giuseppe was being rebuilt in Lisbon, expected back by summer. Rossini and Sons would survive. Slowly, carefully, Antonio was rebuilding what had nearly been lost. But something had changed in him. He moved through his days with a quieter energy now, less certainty, more consideration. He'd started attending a different church, a small parish in the Tenderloin that served the poor and the struggling, and he volunteered there on weekends, serving soup and listening to stories. He was learning what it meant to see people as they were, not as he'd assumed them to be. On the 15th of February, exactly 1 month after the trial, Antonio did something he'd been contemplating for weeks. He walked to Kearny Street, to the pawn shop with its window full of surrendered dreams, and pushed open the door. Shylock was behind the counter, inventorying pocket watches. He looked up when the bell jangled, and for a moment neither man spoke. The air between them was heavy with history and hurt. "Antonio," Shylock said finally, "come to gloat?" "No, come to apologize. Properly this time." Antonio removed his fedora, holding it in his hands. "I've been thinking about what you said in court, about becoming what I accused you of being, and you were right. I pushed you to that. Not alone, not entirely, but I contributed. My words, my judgments, my casual cruelty dressed up as honesty." Shylock set down the watch he'd been examining. "Why now? You won. You kept your business, because winning isn't the same as being right." Antonio stepped closer to the counter. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve that. But I wanted you to know I see it now, what I couldn't see before. The doors that open for me don't open for you. The respect given to me freely is denied to you for no reason except ignorance and prejudice. And I participated in that. I'm sorry." The shop was quiet, except for the ticking of a dozen clocks on the shelves. Shylock studied Antonio's face, searching for deception, for manipulation. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "You hurt me," Shylock said, "for years. Little cuts that added up. I know. And now I've hurt myself worse than you ever could. I became the villain. I proved every terrible thing people think about Jews, that we're vengeful, that we care only about money, that we can't forgive." "That's not true," Antonio said. "What happened between us, that's not about you being Jewish. That's about both of us being broken in different ways. Me with my arrogance, you with your fear." Shylock came around the counter, and the two men stood facing each other in the cramped shop. "My daughter Jessica, do you know Lorenzo Rossi? He works for you." "I do. Good man. Hard worker. He married my Jessica, took her away from me, and I've been sitting Shiva, mourning her as if she died, because I couldn't accept that she chose love over my fears." Shylock's voice cracked. "Rebecca says I drove her away, that my prison became her prison. She's right." Antonio was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I could arrange for you to see her, casually. Lorenzo mentioned she comes to the waterfront sometimes, watching the ships. I could make sure you're there at the same time." Why would you do that? Because the debt I owe you isn't $3,000. It's bigger than that. It's recognition, respect, the basic decency I should have shown from the beginning. Antonio extended his hand. I can't fix everything, Shylock, but I can try to be better. And maybe that's enough to start. Shylock looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he took it. The handshake was brief, awkward, but real. I don't forgive you, Shylock said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I don't want to carry this hate anymore. It's too heavy. I understand, Antonio said. I'll take understanding over forgiveness. It's more than I deserve. 2 days later, on a Thursday afternoon, Jessica stood at Pier 33, watching longshoremen unload cargo from a ship just arrived from Mexico. She came here sometimes when Lorenzo was working, drawn by the energy of the waterfront, the sense of connection to something larger than her small apartment and smaller life. She didn't see her father approach, didn't know he was there until his voice, hesitant and small, said her name. Jessica? She turned, and her heart stopped. Shylock stood 10 feet away, wearing his coat and yarmulke, looking older and more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. They stared at each other across the distance that was both 10 feet and infinite. Papa, she whispered. I'm not here to ask you to come home, Shylock said quickly, as if he'd rehearsed this. I'm not here to make you feel guilty or to tell you you're wrong. I'm just here because I miss you. Because I've been sitting in our apartment pretending you're dead, and it's the stupidest thing I've ever done, and I've done some very stupid things lately. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I hurt you. No. Shylock stepped closer. No, you were right to leave. I was suffocating you with my fear. Your mother helped me see that. You needed to breathe, to live, to choose your own path. I just wish, his voice broke, I just wish I hadn't lost you completely. You haven't lost me. Jessica closed the distance between them, and they stood facing each other, father and daughter, separated by religion and choice, but connected by blood and love. Papa, I'm still Jewish. I wear this cross because Lorenzo gave it to me, but I still light candles on Friday nights. I still remember the prayers Mama taught me. I haven't forgotten who I am. But you married outside the faith. I married a good man who loves me. That doesn't erase where I came from. It just adds to who I'm becoming. Shylock reached out tentatively and touched her face, the way he used to when she was small. You look happy. Are you happy? Most days, but I miss you. And Mama, I miss Friday night dinners and your terrible jokes and the way you hum when you work in the shop. Your mother wants to see you? She's been sneaking visits, you know. Jessica laughed through her tears. I know, I love her for it. Would you... Shylock struggled with the words. Would you and Lorenzo come to dinner this Friday? Your mother would be so happy. And I would try. I can't promise I'll be good at it, but I would try to be welcoming. Yes, Jessica said. Yes, we'll come. They embraced then, awkwardly at first, then tighter, both of them crying, both of them holding on, as if they might disappear if they let go. The wedding of Bassanio and Portia Belmont took place on March 20th, the first day of spring, at the Belmont estate in Napa Valley. The vineyards were coming alive with tender green shoots pushing through the old wood, promising a new vintage, a new beginning. The ceremony was held on the terrace overlooking the valley, with views that stretched for miles, gold hills, blue sky, and the kind of California light that makes everything looked like it's been touched by grace. Portia wore a cream silk dress with lace sleeves, simple and elegant, her dark hair adorned with orange blossoms. Bassanio wore a new suit, charcoal gray, and when he saw her walking toward him, his eyes filled with tears. Antonio stood beside him as best man, and Nerissa beside Portia as maid of honor, both of them beaming. The priest was Father Benedetto from Saints Peter and Paul in North Beach, an old man with kind eyes who'd known Bassanio since childhood. He spoke the words of the ceremony in English and Latin, blessing the union, talking about love as choice and sacrifice and daily renewal. When Bassanio and Portia exchanged rings, the assembled guests, a mixture of Italian merchants from San Francisco, wine growers from Napa, and Portia's society friends applauded and cheered. But what made the day truly remarkable was who else had come. In the back row, sitting quietly, were Lorenzo and Jessica Rossi, and beside them, wearing his best suit and looking uncomfortable but determined, was Shylock Levy, with Rebecca holding his hand. Antonio had invited them personally, driving to Kearny Street to extend the invitation in person. Shylock had been skeptical at first. Why would you want me at your cousin's wedding, after everything? But Antonio had been insistent. Because this wedding happened because of you. Your money made it possible. Your contract, in a strange way, brought Portia into our lives. And because if we're going to move forward, we need to do it together, not in separate corners nursing our wounds. So Shylock had come, and when Bassanio saw him in the crowd, he'd nodded in acknowledgment, and Shylock had nodded back. It was a small gesture, but it mattered. The reception was held in the villa's great room and spilled out onto the terrace as the afternoon turned to evening. There was music, a string quartet playing Vivaldi and American jazz, and food that went on for courses, each more delicious than the last. Wine from the Belmont vineyards flowed freely, the good bottles Lorenzo had laid down years earlier, now opened to celebrate his daughter's joy. Antonio found Shylock standing alone near the garden, holding a glass of wine but not drinking, watching the festivities with the air of someone not quite sure he belonged. "Thank you for coming," Antonio said, joining him. "Your cousin is a lucky man. She's remarkable, your Portia. She's not my Portia. She's Bassanio's. But yes, she is remarkable." Antonio sipped his own wine. "I wanted to tell you the Madonna del Mar arrived yesterday, early. The cargo from the replacement voyage sold well. I'll have your $3,000 by the end of the month, with interest as the judge specified." Shylock turned to look at him. "So you won after all." "The ships came in, some of them, and with help. Portia loaned me capital to fund the replacement voyage. She didn't have to, but she did." Antonio paused. "Shylock, I don't want the end of our story to be a debt paid and nothing more. I was thinking my business needs an accountant, someone who understands finance, who's meticulous with numbers. The pay would be fair, and you'd have your own office." Shylock's eyebrows rose. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering a partnership. Not ownership, we've learned that lesson, but a professional relationship. Your expertise in exchange for fair compensation and respect. What do you say?" For a long moment, Shylock didn't answer. He looked out over the vineyards, at the party happening behind them, at Jessica, laughing with Lorenzo across the terrace, finally free of the weight she'd been carrying. "I'll think about it," Shylock said finally. "But Antonio, if I say yes, if we do this, you have to promise me something. No charity, no pity. I want to work because I'm good at what I do, not because you feel guilty." "Agreed. You're hired for your skills, not my conscience." Shylock extended his hand again, and this time the handshake was firmer, more confident. "Then I'll give you my answer next week, after I've thought it through properly." They stood together watching the celebration. Two men who'd been enemies finding their way towards something that wasn't quite friendship, but might become it, given time. As the sun set over the Napa Valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold, Bassanio and Portia stood on the terrace accepting congratulations. When they reached Shylock and Rebecca in the receiving line, there was a moment of awkwardness. "Mr. Levy," Portia said warmly, "I'm so glad you could come. Thank you for making this possible." "Truly, I nearly destroyed it," Shylock said. "I'm not sure I deserve thanks. You deserve recognition for changing your mind, for choosing connection over isolation. That takes courage." She gestured to Jessica across the room. "Your daughter is lovely. You should be proud." "I'm learning to be," Shylock said quietly. Bassanio shook Shylock's hand. "The money you loaned me, it changed my life. I can never repay that." "Well, Antonio will repay the actual money, but you know what I mean." "Just be good to her," Shylock said, nodding toward Portia. "That's repayment enough." Later, as the party wound down and guests began departing, Antonio found himself on the terrace alone, looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. He thought about the past 6 months, the loan, the ships, the trial, the near loss of everything. And he thought about what he'd gained: humility, awareness, the beginning of wisdom. He'd started the story as Antonio Rossini, successful merchant, secure in his place in the world. He was ending it as someone smaller and larger, at once smaller in ego, larger in understanding. "Antonio?" Portia's voice came from behind him. She and Bassanio approached, her head on his shoulder. "Thank you. For everything. For believing in Bassanio when he couldn't believe in himself. For risking everything." "I'd do it again," Antonio said, and meant it. "Though hopefully with better insurance next time." They laughed, the three of them standing under the California stars, connected by choices and chances, and the strange alchemy that turns risk into love and fear into grace. Spring turned to early summer in San Francisco, and the city bloomed with possibility. The Madonna del Mar made 3 successful voyages, and the San Giuseppe finally returned from Lisbon, repaired and seaworthy. Antonio paid Shylock the $3,150 on May 1st, a full month early, and Shylock accepted it with a handshake and something that might have been the beginning of a smile. True to his word, Antonio hired Shylock as the accountant for Rossini and Sons. They worked together awkwardly at first, 2 men learning to navigate shared space after so much conflict. But Shylock's mind for numbers was exceptional, and he found inefficiencies in Antonio's operations that saved thousands of dollars. Antonio, in turn, introduced Shylock to his network of merchants, vouching for him, opening doors that had always been closed. It wasn't friendship, not exactly, but it was respect. And that was enough. On Friday evenings, Lorenzo and Jessica joined Shylock and Rebecca for Shabbat dinner in the apartment above the pawn shop. Shylock said the prayers in Hebrew, blessed the wine and bread, and Rebecca lit the candles while Jessica covered her eyes and whispered the ancient words. Lorenzo sat respectfully, learning the traditions, asking questions, and Shylock answered them, teaching his son-in-law the history Jessica carried in her blood. After one such dinner in June, as Lorenzo and Jessica prepared to leave, Shylock pulled his daughter aside. "I'm selling the pawn shop," he said quietly. Jessica's eyes widened. "Papa, why?" "That shop has been your life." "No, you've been my life. Your mother has been my life. The shop was just how I protected myself after Vienna. But I don't need protection anymore. I need purpose." He smiled, and it reached his eyes this time. "Antonio's business is growing. He needs the capital I've saved. I'm going to invest as a partner-real partnership this time, legal and proper. And your mother and I are going to travel. Back to Italy to see where the Rossinis import from. Maybe even to Vienna to say goodbye to the ghosts." "Papa, are you sure?" "I'm sure. Life is too short to spend it in a shop full of other people's broken dreams. I want to live my own dreams before it's too late." They embraced, and Jessica felt the last piece of her guilt dissolve. Her father wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. In Belmont, Portia discovered she was pregnant in July. She told Bassanio on the terrace at sunset, the same place they'd been married, and he lifted her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at once. They called Antonio immediately to share the news, and his joy over the crackling phone line was so pure, so genuine, that Portia understood why Bassanio loved him so much. "You'll be the godfather," Bassanio told him. "No arguments." "I wouldn't dream of arguing," Antonio said. "I'll spoil that child rotten." Life moved forward in the way life does, with work and worry, joy and sorrow, the daily thousand small choices that add up to existence. Antonio dated occasionally, women introduced by well-meaning friends, but nothing serious ever developed. He seemed content with his work, his friends, his role as the beloved uncle waiting to happen. On a September afternoon, almost a year after he'd first walked into Shylock's pawn shop, Antonio stood on Pier 33, watching a new ship being loaded with cargo. First vessel he'd purchased since the crisis. This one was named the Jessica, with Shylock's blessing and at his suggestion. It seemed right somehow, naming a ship for new beginnings and bridges built. Shylock came to the pier to see it launched, along with Rebecca, Jessica, and Lorenzo. They stood together as the Jessica's horn sounded 3 times, and the crew cast off lines. The ship moved slowly from the dock, its hull gleaming with fresh paint, heading out toward the Golden Gate and the ocean beyond. "She's beautiful," Jessica said, watching her namesake ship glide across the water. "She is," Antonio agreed, "just like the woman she's named for. Brave enough to sail into unknown waters." Shylock put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, and the gesture was so natural, so free of the tension that had defined their relationship for so long, that Antonio felt his throat tighten with emotion. Later, after the others had left, Antonio remained on the pier as the afternoon light turned golden. Bassanio found him there, having driven down from Napa for a business meeting that was really just an excuse to see his cousin. "Portia's asking about Thanksgiving," Bassanio said, leaning against the railing beside Antonio. "She wants everyone at the villa. You, Shylock, and Rebecca, Jessica, and Lorenzo, half of North Beach if we can fit them. She's already planning the menu. Tell her I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it." They stood in companionable silence, watching the bay, the ships, the city rising on its hills behind them. The fog was starting to roll in, that familiar San Francisco fog that transformed the ordinary into something magical. "Antonio," Bassanio said finally, "I never properly thanked you for everything. For believing in me when I was a mess, for risking your business, for showing me what love actually looks like. You don't need to thank me. You're family. You're my family. And now Portia is too, and the baby will be. And maybe that's enough. Maybe family is what we build, not just what we're born into. Shylock said something similar last week about choosing family. He's a wise man. I should have seen that sooner. The fog rolled closer, wrapping around the pier pilings, softening the edges of the world. In the distance, a ship's horn sounded low, mournful, beautiful. The sound of departure and return, of journeys ending and beginning, of the constant motion that is life itself. Antonio thought about Shakespeare's original story, set in Venice 400 years ago, with its caskets and courtrooms and the pound of flesh that was never taken. That story had been about justice and mercy, about the cost of prejudice and the possibility of redemption. This story, his story, was about the same things, just translated to a different time, a different place, a different language. But the truth remained the same. We are all merchants of something. We all bargain with fate, risk what we value, hope that what we give will be returned with interest. Some ships come in, some are lost at sea, and the wisest among us learn that the real treasure isn't what we accumulate, but what we share, what we risk, what we give away freely to those we love. The fog reached the pier, and Antonio and Bassanio turned to walk back to shore, back to the city, back to the lives waiting for them there. Behind them, the bay disappeared into white mystery. Ahead, the lights of San Francisco began to flicker on, one by one, like promises being kept. In 1955, in the fog and the light, in the space between loss and grace, Antonio Rossini walked home, not to an empty apartment, but to dinner with friends, to laughter and wine and the knowledge that he'd been given a second chance and hadn't wasted it. The merchant of Venice had become the merchant of San Francisco, and he'd learned, finally, what it meant to be rich,